We got we go spot up here. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got is here. Yeah. Speaker. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the library this evening. I'm Damien Strucker. I'm the library director. And before I turn things over to Beth, I wanted to just promote a few library programs real quick. We have the Titonka Chess Club, the third Wednesday of each month. And I encourage, if you're a beginner, if you don't know the rules at all, if you're a grizzled vet, still just come on out and check it out. It's the more the merrier. We have another event on March 30th at 6 p.m. Major moments in the history of Christianity. And Reverend Bergstrom is going to lead that presentation. And, my idea for that is that, there's a lot of, I guess, historical information that you might get bits and pieces of during sermons and things, but very rarely is there just like a systematic sort of timeline presentation of major events where you can get some good context and just some good framework of what's going on. So it's a secular presentation, whatever denomination you are. If you're just interested in history, it's just a history focused presentation, but it'll give you sort of a lay of the land. And then Luke Yarn with Rachel. I've made it was just a comedy of errors trying to figure out the date for this, and it's still to be announced, but I wanted to throw it out there. If you're interested in loop yarn, you can make scarves, blankets, pillows. Rachel, wave hi, Rachel. She's been doing it for a long time, and I think she'll be able to teach everybody the method. And once you get the hang of it, really sort of the sky's the limit for all the different stuff you can make. You don't need any tools or anything. You just use your fingers. And then, if you have a kid or grandson or daughter, we have pages for pizza still. And I think that with fourth quarter sort of coming up here, that it could be a good incentive to kind of get kids to finish strong and read. Next door, Reeves has donated a small single topping personal pan pizza. If you do 4 reading sessions, and you get it stamped here at the library, and people have been doing that all year. But I think I'm going to close it off for the summer, and then start it back up when the school year starts again. So sprint to the finish with fourth quarter, and you could spread the word on that. And then lastly, I wanted to mention this Titonka Heritage Oral History Project. I have about 6 interviews from longtime residents in the can already, and we've gotten a lot of good information. I mean, it's stuff that that's historically important that'll be preserved by the library, and it's just a window into Titonka's past, and we're recording the interviews and transcribing them. And we have a space on our website for where we have all the old newspapers from town and all the old yearbooks where the interviews will go. So if you're interested in that, or if you know somebody that might be interested in that, I've kind of tapped out everybody that I know. As people I was friends with first, kind of on that. But yeah, if you know anybody that might be interested, just let me know. And before I give a formal introduction here to Beth, I mean, history it's really important to me professionally and even personally. And I've told my students that living life without an understanding of what happened in the past is like trying to steer a boat without a rudder. And without that historical foundation, you can just kind of meander and float aimlessly, which is why I'm happy Beth is here, because she's jumped headfirst into the history of this area for her latest book. And really, it's a global history too. I studied history myself as a history teacher, and people would sort of scoff if somebody gives a book talk about a one idea book. where it's just this one thing. But I know with Beth's book, it's just got a lot of layers to it. It's a local history, it's national, it's world. It's got a lot packed in there. And Beth, she was a dancer, a musician, a journalist, and an author. And she used her journalism degree and a lifetime of dance and music to see three careers. She was a dancer and soloist for the Minnesota Dance Theater, and as a special events coordinator and PR rep for her company Tada. One name, appreciate that name. And as an author, she's published 4 books. The When Winter Came is her 4th one. The first 3 were from North Star Press, and this current release is from the Mayo Clinic Press. Beth graduated from Iowa State University with a degree in technical journalism. While writing her first 3 books, she studied at St. Catherine University. She studied at the Loft Literary Center. And she was a professional in residence at Iowa State University, the Greenlee School of Journalism. And she's got some dance credentials too. While in the faculty of the Minnesota Dance Theater, she soloed with Garrison Keillor on Prairie Home Companion. She worked with the Minnesota Orchestra on a performance called the Tap Concerto. And she also worked with Gregory Hines to promote his film Tap, and also with Christopher Plummer and Minnesota Orchestra's British series. She's a native of Mason City, Iowa. She's lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota for the past 50 years. She's in Titonka tonight, one night and one night only. So let's give a hand for that.
Book. And I've been here a lot earlier, but I wanted to say all these things are on the table to look at, the photos from, I'll tell what some of them are. And this is Grandpa's Prince Albert's suit, which he brought from Luxembourg in 1893. Tried to wear it several times in Bangkok, but no one was really wearing anything like that. And they laughed and told it later in life in the Indian Bay. And he had a course with Pierrie. And as he packed out, he came from Paris, he came in his trunk from Luxembourg. Somebody told him, if you're going to be a doctor, this is what you should wear. But they weren't wearing it in Chicago anywhere else either. But I think about well, you gave it. It's engraved. His General Practitioner of the Year, 1953. All this on the head of the Iowa Medical Society. You kept the title a little shorter and said doctor. But that was it. And these are baptismal dresses. He married a woman in Chicago, and her father was a greenhouse builder, and she was born at the very beginning. And so her baptismal dress is tucked cotton, and it's beautiful. But by the time she had a baby in 1899, it had to be sewed and lace and from Marshall Fields. And so we have both of them, and all the Sartor children with us here in Bancroft. Right? The first one's born in Chicago, and then the following. They moved all the children from Bancroft to St. Paul. They were 4 to 18 years old. I'm going to sit down because I can't stand that long. Yeah.
Beth, you will be.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to get back to those now. I'm just going to talk about it. Sure. How do I know Titonka? We came here every Christmas Day. So you're going to be my Christmas town. You're going to be important. That first we went to Buffalo Center because my mother was raised on a farm there. And there I had all these boy cousins that were younger than me. That was an active stuff. But when we got to Titonka, this was Grandma Sartor's house, and it was just china and beautiful dishes, and the other cousins were much older, not a lot, but if I'm 80, they were now 85. One of the things that I remember in Titonka is this box. My grandfather sat me on his lap, and he would open the box, and he would pull things out and tell a story. And I was 4, and that's about as early as any memory I have. But we did it often, and he would pull something out and tell about his childhood in Lux. And he had a chronic earache, and his father was his first caretaker. He sent him to a large city for a year to be treated with just his brother. And that is the point where he decided he missed his little town. Freiburg is very small. And he came home, and his father decided this is the one he had to educate. He's frail. He's never going to work on the farm. And so then had to be tutored, and that's the only year in his life he lived in Freiburg. And so from there on, he moved to the boarding school in a big city, and he graduated at the top of his class. He had a lot of challenges because that year had kept him back. Then he went to even a larger city for upper school. By then, he really missed his school. And his brothers were in America by then, and they brought him over on a French tramp steamer, which is a story in itself. There was no health requirement to get on there. People died during the passage. The boat stopped for a week. It was a tough time for that. And then he got to his brothers. He landed. He speaks 5 languages, but English is the 5th. No one can understand him. He's trying to say he wants to get to High Ridge, but he rolls his R's. And I heard him say High Ridge on the tape, and I don't do it. And he had a smock on it, his mother hand loom and monogram, and it was for dress wear. But what it meant in America was he was an immigrant and probably from a farm. Not that impressive to people, but it was his best shirt. Well, he had a great sense of humor. So later in life, he said, I don't know if my success in finding Chicago was my lovely wear or my sophisticated accent. He had a great sense. So that is how I knew Titonka. Also, in the summer, we came for Indian Day, always. And we rode on the Intermill float. My cousin, my mother's sister's daughter, a year younger. And Titonka to me meant freedom because I could roam. And I couldn't roam like that in Mason City. Did a big double block with friends on it, but when I'm in Titonka, we could go anywhere. We could go down Main Street, we could walk into the country, we could go to her friend on a farm. That was, to me, that was a great memory. And the other thing was we would sit and hear our parents in the next room, and they would be laughing and having such a good time. And I didn't ever hear my parents like that. My dad was busy. He was a doctor. He had doctor's luncheons, and they went to office Christmas parties. And my mother played bridge, but no one ever came over like that and just sat and reminisced. And that was such a fun memory of Titonka. So that is my, one more thing about Titonka that I wasn't expecting. When I got through the 7th draft of the book, I wanted a doctor to comment and say, what do you think about this? He treated 1,100 patients and he lost 5. And this is how he did it, and I'll tell you how he did it. But what do you think of that? And she said, I think he could never do this. If, how big is that town? They cooperated. They helped follow through on his plan. If they had not done that, he couldn't do it. So that was my next part about Titonka, is Titonka was the success in that story. And I'll tell you what they did to follow. It's nothing like our pandemic. Journey is in the title, and journey is not just geographic. Journey is his path through life. I told you about Luxembourg, the French tramp steamer, Chicago. In Chicago, he's thinking, he has seen, he's heard about the cholera epidemic in Paris generations before, and they're blaming it on the poor. And they will get it, but the wealthy can go to parties if they won't get it. Well, it was the water. It had nothing to do with being poor. So he decided then he would someday treat everybody, whether they could afford it or not. And he was never will. And that was one big goal that he had on the journey. Then in Chicago, he considered that if he ever did fight a pandemic, and that was his goal, he said they lived in chicken coops, stacked on top of each other. How would he separate them? This was going to be contagious. He needed a small town. He knew this already because he could spread them out. They're already spread out there in farms around the town. And so this is where the big love story starts. One day the editor called me. This is Mayo Clinic. They love facts. So I've been documenting every fact in my book. And one day he called me, he says, Beth, there are 2 love stories in this book. And it's true. This Chicago story is a love story because he kept leaving to go see what the little town might be like in Iowa that needed a doctor. But he wanted to marry this girl in Chicago. And I don't think her family, I can't say that they said anything because this is nonfiction. I can't put words in their mouth, but she's their oldest daughter and she's engaged. And where is he? He's in Bancroft, where they need a German-speaking Catholic doctor. So this went on until the doctor in High Ridge, Chicago, died. He had to come back. And when he did, it all kind of fell together again, and people kind of got used to the idea that he was going to go to the Iowa Prairie. And they called it that. They didn't know what was on the Iowa Prairie. They had no idea. And he was in Bancroft 18 years. And that's when he went to Titonka. So that his journey is a journey in many ways. How do I know what I know? My dad had a hobby of electronics, and he recorded my grandpa. Whenever he got to town, he was a storyteller. And so he would play those tapes late at night. And my bedroom's above his den. My mother got kind of tired of the tapes in the daytime. So he played them late, and I heard these tapes. And my grandpa came to our house on Sunday afternoons because my parents built a house in 1949. It was after the war. They couldn't get the materials. And when they built that church, my grandpa would come with his daughters on Sunday to go to 12:15 church and then come to our house. So I could hear all these stories that they told of their childhood and my dad growing up. And my mother said I took inventory. That seemed to be my job. I had to, know everything, look into everything. And that went on. I wondered why I was the only one there, but my younger brother and sister were born in 49 and 52. They were napping, obviously. So that's why I got to really be part of that. And at this point, the box had come to Mason City into the new house. And my dad started putting things into the box. And I don't remember stories with my dad so much, except that there were letters in there from the woman who put him through medical school. This is a couple where he was working in construction for the greenhouse company of his grandfather in Chicago. And these people had lost a son, and they asked him, what is it you would really like to do? He's a country teacher for about 6 years in this area, and then working in the summer in construction. He said he'd like to be a doctor. Well, Pierre's not wealthy. He can't put him through medical school. So they said, we'll put you through medical school. And my mother said that was the miracle of their life when they did that. So what did he do? He promptly got married. And had to ask her, the letters are in the box. Does it matter, if I'm married? And they said, no, be the same tuition and room and board. But the problem, and this is the second love story, is they couldn't afford to live together. It was the Depression. And they had a baby after a year. And fortunately, she was born. My older sister, she's 10 years older. And she's 90 now, amazing 90. And they lived above his office in the summer, is what the plan was. And then she said, the saddest day in my life, we had to move and stay with my parents because we couldn't make it. She said, if people say two can eat for the price of one, she said, one of them isn't hungry. So, but they did it. And today, it's kind of amazing to think that they could do that. And she moved into town with Celeste when she started school, and she made money by taking in men's suits and making them into women's suits, and they were $3 a piece. And the joke was she sold 100 of them, so they figured they must be walking up and down the streets of these towns, because 100 is a lot of suits. But then he got through pediatrics. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, Bob Robertson, Chicago. They moved there with him. Just like his father, they wanted a small town. And he said it was the most important job he ever had, but Mason City had an opening for a pediatrician. And they didn't think they could do it because they had rented a apartment, and he had a contract. So my mother talked to the director and said, this is what we want to do. And he said, well, we'll let him out of his contract. And they sublet the apartment and moved to Mason City in a blizzard. It's almost like the beginning of the book, to Mason City. And then I was born the next year. So how did he do it? That flu. How did he save? He didn't save that many people. They didn't die. What he did, the doctor in Titonka left to live in Algona because there's a hospital. And doctors like to live in a town with a hospital. If they have emergencies, they're right there. So he asked Pierre if he would move from Bancroft to Titonka and take over. And then, while he's still thinking about it, that doctor was drafted, so he wasn't even going to be nearby in Algona. The spring flu was already there, and Pierre is thinking, this is the pandemic I want to fight. I think very good, it could happen. And Titonka has no doctor. Well, he had 6 children in Bancroft. The family that was a wonderful town for them. But there was this pull that he was needed, and throughout his life, he went where he was needed. And he went to Titonka, and this doctor took him around to his patients, and he really liked Titonka. The problem was, and it never turned out to be a problem. He's Catholic, and there's no Catholic church in Titonka or Catholics. And immigrants typically go where their church is and where their ethnic is. But he didn't. He just thought they needed him, and this is what he would do. Spring, there was the flu, but the family loved it. They had a wonderful time all spring, all summer, picnicking, the slew. You got the slew. I mean, they love that. And fall came, and I'm going to read from his journal so you can hear his words, in his own words, what that flu. He goes to individual places and he tells how that went. But how did he do it? Back to how did he do it? He asked them when they got the flu to call him immediately. Now that's going to be hard because when you get something, you think you'll be better the next day, and it's going to make a big fuss, and you might as well see. But they did it, and they didn't even all have phones. So that was a big jump start. And he said, I will be there tonight or in the morning. And when they knew that, they did that. And when he got there, his next rule was isolation. He wanted that patient by itself, and he wanted that rest of that family out of there. That was difficult for all the things we face in our pandemic that maybe we don't want to do. This was ingrained. People move, 10 people move in to help clean, cook, and care for that patient. So that was a hard one, but they did it. And he had caretaker families lined up to take them. And he didn't say anything about this, but if it was me, move people in that just moved out of a house that's got a flu patient in it, but they did it. And the last part was he trained caretakers, single caretakers, to take care of that patient. And as the flu went on, he ran out of caretakers, but then he would find someone in that family that would come in and take care of that patient. And he had rules. He was just at the cusp of medicine in 1893 in his training. The germ theory was there. He knew about sterilization. He wanted the windows open for fresh air. He wanted everything washed. Everything that touched the patient had to be clean. The sheets had to go out. At some point, he'd say, burn the sheets. Just keep that patient clean. This is what we have to do. And they did it. And that's where it was sort of miraculous that he did that. And later in life, the Iowa Medical Society named him General Practitioner of the Year. It was a huge honor. And the people in Titonka in the area were asked to write letters of not recommendation, why they thought he should get that honor. The letters just poured in, and there are a dozen of them from different church ministers who talked about how he would ask the patient at some point, would they like to pray? Do they pray? Do they have a religion? And whatever religion they had, he learned the prayers from their religion and sat and prayed with them. And then asked if they would like their minister. And then if they did, he would call the minister in. And he was quoted in the paper as saying, I have never heard anyone pray like that Lutheran minister. I have never heard such loud prayer and such long prayer. And by the morning, the patient was better. Had all the respect in the world for that, and also for music. Wanted music around if possible. And he, what was the last thing? Music. It'll come back to me. Well, he stayed by the bedside for one thing. He didn't leave them. He waited until the next patient and then he'd go. And throughout this, my father was the driver of the sleigh or the car or whatever. He was 12 years old. He was in knickers. I don't know why he didn't get the flu or why my grandpa didn't get the flu. But that was how he did it.
And it's interesting that people cooperated like that. But I was around him. I was 17 when he died. And you did like him. He was very modest. He was given a lot of awards in his life. And for two of the biggest ones, he didn't show up because he had a patient to get to Algona. The first one was the mailman had a nosebleed that had just gone on too long. So he didn't know he was getting an award that night. He just took him to the Algona hospital. And the doctors in Kasuth County gathered at his home and just waited. He had to come home. And when he did, they told him about his 50-year award. And the other one was an earache. And he would empathize with an earache that he had it as a child. So he missed when they nominated him to be General Practitioner of the Year. And they took him and they went to the house and told him. But this is humorous, when Dr. Kretzmeyer from the Kasuth County Medical Society introduced him at the Iowa Medical Society in Des Moines for his award, he referred to him as their roly-poly cherub. He thought that was fine. And actually, he wasn't tall at all. He's a very small man. His wife, I'm kind of named after her too, because she's also Pierrie Sartor, was tall. She had, my grandson's named these monkey arms. He was not tall, but what's tall when he wore his top hat, he pointed out. So, and he was also, I would say stout, just not very tall. And his trousers, he couldn't remember to have them hemmed. He had to, but he never did. So his plan was to hike them way up and put suspenders on and then put his suit coat and white shirt and tie. And you didn't really see it. There's a few photos where you see it and it's almost comical. So, and he had a good sense of humor about it. So that, I was going to read from he wrote a memoir about the time he was getting these awards because he had to speak. And it's the most beautiful old world penmanship. I'll put it out on the thing. I'm going to read it from his penmanship because it seems so authentic to read his real writing rather than from something transcribed. He named his memoir, and I'm not going to read it all, just this. Thrills of My Life, specifically my flu life. He's not kidding. I mean, he wanted to treat this, and it's thrills of my life. Summer, okay, and also this is his fifth language, so once in a while the sentences are. Summer over, fall season here, winter just around the corner, and still no flu as yet. Traveling salesmen were telling stories of flu, funerals every day, only 10, 20 miles away. Towns quarantined, no one stayed in this or that town no longer than absolutely necessary. My God, I was a-thinking, did the Lord forget me? No cases yet. I could diagnose a flu. It's not that he wants the flu, he's in the wrong place, he's thinking. Then, on the 1st of October, this is the only patient he names, Mrs. George Lamoureux came home on the Klondike around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a mighty sick woman. She'd been visiting her brother in the Navy at the Great Lakes Naval Station, a short distance north of Chicago on Michigan Lake shores. He had the flu, and the trained men were positive she had the flu. Her condition was such, I judged, she could not be taken to her home a mile south of town, but take her to Grandma L's house, only 2 blocks southeast of Depot. And he writes in here later, this means anything, the Dwight Graham residence.
Yep.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, it means something. He wrote it in. The next morning, I was called in the long expected real flu. For 3 weeks, almost every day, I had to be in attendance. The 3rd week, Mr. George Lamoureux himself was down. Somehow it spread like wildfire on wild prairie land. Somewhere northeast of town, there had been a barn dance and a goodly visited affair. The next day, a young farmer, owner of the place, fell sick while working hay for a neighbor. Taken home, doctor called, flu, no doubt, died 3 days after. A couple of children, same flu, got well. The place was northeast. The barn dance participants were all from northeast and southeast. Inquiry of names, and sure, most of them came down. What he's doing is tracing. They do that now. The list was a sure guide before time of new breakouts in farm places, not only listed in time ones beforehand, but other in the farmhouse, northeast, southeast. In the meantime, the flu spread in town, almost every residence, and there were 60 residences. How many are there now? More. Yeah. Okay. From town, the epidemic was carried to the south and southwest, to Doane, and farther from town to the north and northwest. When it tapered off in one direction, it would be worse in some other direction. In November, the northeast and east, there were about 40 to 50 farms, residences I would have on my daily list and route. There were 3 severe cases. And he goes into, I can't read all of this because he's just devastated. His nurse dies, and it's not even his nurse, it's Dr. Dalmage from Buffalo Center's nurse. Well, he's going to go on for quite a while. He was devastated about it. But he gets to the point where he just kind of pulls together, and he says, right here, let me say that in 5 months and a half, I lost only 5 flu victims out of a total about 1,100 cases. Bedfast, not light perambulatory cases counted even. Soon after the Lord sent me the first case, okay, the Lord is sending him the case. He feels fortunate. My daily routine was like this. After breakfast, left home, made house after house, farm after farm until 10 o'clock at night or midnight, dinner, bedtime, sleep, usually telephone call answers in bed for new cases, giving general behavior directions and promise for next day. For almost the whole winter, no fire in the fireplace, no fire in the office, nobody to keep it going. Then Dr. Ray in the next town came down with flu, and thus the town and surrounding farm homes came next under my care, a couple of victims each house, as far as 3 miles east and 4 miles south. Right north, a border of the lake between Woden and Britt. And Mayo made me draw a map of this to show where, and then they do the map after that. In order to reach that far out, I used the services of the Rock Island section crew and a hand-pumping car, a lorry, no motor, to 3 miles east of Woden. And there was horses and wagon ready to take me south, where I had 4 flu cases to take care of almost every day. All got well. Right here, let me mention one of my rules, strictly enforced if possible, was isolation. No 2 patients in any one room, and much less in one bed. Windows open, use of liner shutters day and night. This reminds me of one married couple with already grown up children. Mother was first, soon followed by husband. One day, I found both mother and husband in one and same bed. When I reminded them of my rule of isolation, mother said, "Doctor, I'd rather die of the flu than to be even a single night without my husband." For 3 years, we never missed a single night without company to each other. All right, I said, no rule without exception. May the good Lord be with you. What else could I do? And then he talks about a year after the epidemic, they did separate people in tents. Here's in another case on the south side of town. Now he's talking about the first case. This case is real poverty. And the first one was not. They had a bedroom upstairs for the husband, but he's going to tell this story. In another case on the south side of town, it took a special allowance of the Red Cross. A laborer and his wife came down with the flu at the same time, and of course, in the same bed of necessity, as there's only one bed. A man from town was hired to take care of them. There was also a little boy, 3 years, became sick, and of course was in the same bed, nestled between father and wife, which of course exposed the little one from both sides. There was a children's buggy in the house, and I naturally supposed if there was a buggy, there would be a little pillow and quilt and so on. So I gave the other attendant man the order to remove the little boy from between father and mother to the buggy. I left the house to go to the next house, but I was called back. The attendant said, "Doctor, there's neither pillow nor quilt or anything in the house. Tony, call the Red Cross man. You will get what you need." Good. All three got along fine after that. I think he mentions the Red Cross because his wife Mary was very active in the Red Cross. That was big thing that she did. Okay, this is the last story, and it's also the end of the book. Not far from this place, a mother came down with the flu and severe pneumonia complication. A couple of days, her oldest little daughter, 4 years, was the next case. In the little bed in the opposite corner of the room. He'd been there before, and he asked her to get the child out of the bed and into the next room, but it only went to the corner of the room. One day, as the mother improved, mother looked at me and said, pointing to the little girl, she's feeling bad now, "Doctor, if you make that one well again, you can ask of me anything you wish for." "All right," I said, "I want you and your daughter someday to sing for me." And at the bottom, he says, "It's the good Lord, so will it." And then there's more that happens late in his life. The baby's grown up. It's really I couldn't have made this up. They said, "Beth, this is nonfiction," but you were just handed bookends for this book. It's a very cool ending. So if you want to look at the pictures, I've emptied the box. This is the box. And when Mary Mary didn't quite leave home. Every summer for 6 weeks, she took the children to Chicago to be with their parents and brothers and sisters. And the parents had portraits done of the children while they were there. And so some of those, a lot of them, well, none of the children really are in the book. That really wasn't where the story was going, so they didn't use them, but some are here. One of them is of her little brother who died of rabies at 8 from a dog bite. And one, his Guido's little brother, Pierre, couldn't help him. He died at 15, Anthony. And he didn't know what it was. So his pictures here and his business cards. And this is his pen that he used in his office in Titonka. I got it at my dad's estate sale. I didn't know what it was. It didn't have a pen in it. So I realized that and I ordered a pen. So come look at the things at the table. I love being here. Something we absolutely.
Beth, I'm sorry, would you be willing to answer a few questions for a few minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, if we did maybe a little Q&A for a few minutes, and then.
So many parts of the book can relate to not just immigration, lots of things. So
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. I forgot that part.
Yeah, it's all good.
My favorite. Sometimes it's just something people notice that they relate to. They have a story that someone who died in the flu.
Yeah, I got oh, sorry, I don't mean to. Yes, in your research, what did you learn about this? What was the benefit? You get into that at all, or?
I did. I described it. It's pretty well known that it happened 24 hours. Their feet turned blue, their lungs filled with water and drowned. It was a horrible death.
It was quick.
It was quick. Mayo tended not to sensationalize ever in the book. Like I had the recipe for Mary's lung soup from the World War I because they used every part of the animal, and lungs were available in grocery stores. They didn't use that. And after I mentioned it on Iowa Public Radio afterwards, they said, actually, the FDA doesn't allow it anymore. But it works because we all have a no how bad that. Yeah, I have a story about the food, but I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's a little
salve that says Dr. Sartor blood poison drawing salve, spread on cloth and apply twice a day, Titonka, Iowa. And when I was little, we used this. And it hasn't been- what kind of store I remember about but you would put this on and a Band-Aid and it would draw stuff out of it.
in Cedar Rapids, I've been saying, people from Titonka have been showing up everywhere I go. And
We do.
but the woman in Cedar Rapids said, we had this salve that Dr. Sartor made, and she said there was a recipe. Probably, I've been writing this book since 1989, and probably 5 years ago, I got a letter in the mail saying, I have the recipe for Dr. Sartor's salve, and he gave it to me. And so I copied it and sent it to the woman in Cedar Rapids. Would you like the recipe? And my father was so amazed at that. He made his own invention, looking at diaper rash all the time. So in our drugstores in Mason City, it was called Dr. Sartor's famous butt bomb. That one got passed. I'm really glad you said that. I want to see it. Oh, that's his handwriting. Because my recipe's not in his handwriting. It has lard in it, I know that. Yeah, it has a lot of things in it, but you couldn't make it. Oh, I mean, David, can you photograph this for me before you go?
I would like to do it.
Well, if I wasn't destroyed enough already being here, I started out talking and I thought, I don't know where my voice went. I just did the reality of all of these things. It will. It's going in the box.
Yeah.
But plastic bag. Good if you named it, because when he went to medical school, what he studied was eclectic medicine, and at the time his brother picked it because it was closest by train to his home where he's going to stay. But the doctor said it was also a good, and the Mayo Clinic, I didn't mention them in this. Eclectic medicine used the best of everything available, from Native American herbal, which often worked, to things in the lab, medical, and it was against bloodletting, purging, all of these, and that's in this title. So that's kind of surprising that he used that word, but I'm glad it worked. It must be famous. Well, it's going into the box.
How when during your research, did you get a grasp of how far out from Titonka he would go? Because you know, like the idea of having a doctor and making house calls and things is something foreign to me and you. Yeah,
Indigent.
yeah.
And I say that slowly because my computer spell check changed it to indigenous.
I know. It's one of those words.
Mentioned,
Okay.
so blue, he's pretty much specified where he.
Yeah, and he ventured over towards Woden even.
Another
And
doctor.
yeah,
Another
but they got
doctor
sick.
came
Okay.
in. And that first chapter is the only blizzard of the whole winter. Yes, Mayo added that to my map. Oh, yes, I have the letter. You need copies of the letters.
Yeah, I would love.
There's like this many letters, but it was so surprising for us to see how many. So he prayed loudly. Well, one of them said because Pierre was so, his own religion meant so much to him that he respected everyone else's. Well, that was just attitude. And his father's words when he got, they would never see each other again in Luxembourg to America. They didn't go back. And they said, he said, never forget your holy mother, the church. Those are pretty potent words. So his religion was important.
Do you go back to Bancroft for church?
No, he went to Wesley,
Oh,
and we have a book that has prayers if you are unable to go to church because of the weather or he had a patient. Those pages in the middle are just oil stained from use because I don't think you can get 6 children in any car at the time. He bought a car to start the flu and then was almost unable to use it because the only blizzard in the whole winter is the opening chapter. And that's that hard riding a lorry on the railroad tracks with your 12-year-old, that many miles, 3 miles.
yeah, in the winter around here.
But that was the only blizzard. The rest of the winter was mud.
Mm.
And he said that was worse. And he would just hope the farmers would drag the roads. And Guido, my father, when he got his car, he had a mechanic friend. Besides electronics, it was cars whole life. And they rigged the wheels and named the car the Riggedy Jig so that it would follow the slave track.
Oh yeah.
So that's on a calendar. That's a Titonka calendar that has the artist drew. I've been doing this so long that I corresponded with him long ago, but then Mayo got their own artists. There's color illustrations.
Yeah, those are awesome in the book.
Yeah.
They're so cool.
My editor was a is a historian, and I didn't mention this about Mayo. When he got to Bancroft, did I say this? That people did not trust surgery.
Hmm.
And so he was losing people that they just didn't want him to take their appendix out. So he went to take patients to Lakota on the train to go to Rochester. And Mayo has a team approach with doctors, and they would look at the patient from all different ways, and then they would agree with Pierre, this is what needed to be done. And then the people started to let him do that, to let the surgery be, they called it submitting to surgery. So they weren't really enthused, but then when he came home, he decided on Tuesdays he would take out tonsils because that was something that needed to be done. And he called it Tonsil Tuesday.
Tonsil, she called the Tonsil Tuesday. Mhm.
When they felt better, and of course, somebody come out. So It's some characters there between Pierre and Guido, I think.
You said there's a train between Lakota and
There
Rochester?
was.
Or yeah,
There was a lot of research that went into the book, because the minute you think you can just say something, you'll find out you didn't live then. You don't know there was a train. You don't know how people were thinking at the time. For instance, people coming to Chicago from Luxembourg and other places, it was common to just be there a little while and then move on somewhere where they found they could go, but they would land in Chicago and stay till they got a little acclimated to America.
yeah. So can you talk about that a little more, like your research process? You know, you have your first draft, and then once it gets into sort of the editor's hands and things, like what was that transition like? You know, going from, like you were saying, just sort of stuff like, yeah, I'm 99.9% sure there was a train from Dakota to Rochester, but like for this book, I'm going to need some citation. I mean, was that just like a rigmarole?
Yeah, it was almost.
Uh-huh.
And if I put the keywords in and the date and Pierre's name, up would come the fact that actually they got stuck in the mud once, and Pierre was mad at Guido. He wanted to take the car. He shouldn't have taken the car. He forced him home. Find out. I had to verify those things, but what about the research? The real round and around and around came when other people looked at my first draft, and then I would see what someone thought, and they would say, oh, they didn't think the Luxembourg part, but I thought that shaped his character as a
Yeah.
child, that he came through all of that
Mhm.
and knew about cholera. So I was hanging on to that, and then someone said, I don't like all the science in it. I don't think the
Mm.
reader wants to go that far into what the flu was about, what medical school was about. But readers are smart. And when I was reading it for my author groups, I was getting questions that I needed to go find out what was going on around this at the time. And so I knew that this still belonged in there. And one just wanted to just take the journal, put covers on it, an introductory letter, and it would have been about that big, but I just had too much by
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
So I kept kind of hanging on to it. And there were other suggestions, but then it's like a miracle. A man owned a bookstore in when I did the
Mhm.
book festival,
Mhm.
saw the things on Facebook, and he's now working at Mayo Clinic Press. And he said, can I show your manuscript to Mayo Clinic? And that man is here. He drove me here
All
today,
right.
David Yanowski.
All right, David.
Yeah. He got the book. We had a big Zoom meeting. Of course, I didn't quite get on right. I had to do it on the phone. But that's when I learned that every one of them has a team. And every one I ran into was just the top of your field. It was just breathtaking
Yeah.
how well they did this, but they love their facts
Mhm.
and everything. And so the book really gained a lot when they started making me dig in, and they dug in, but I already had been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
But it was my fourth book, and I was ready to do something a little more complicated. The first one was easier. The second one, it was just one story. The third one had 2 point of view characters. That's a little harder. But this one went through 3 centuries.
Oh yeah.
It just
Yeah.
is so much to it. But it took a long, long time. But that was the perfect publisher anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, a good symbiosis between Mayo Clinic and your grandfather anyways.
Oh, it brought tears to people's eyes when they read those doctors' introductions about this doctor,
Mhm.
because some would think that he's a small town country doctor and they wouldn't pay much attention to him. If you have to read those introductions,
Mhm.
they considered him to be a man with an elite education, European, and he came here speaking 5 languages, and he's bringing patients, and he's right when he knows his diagnosis. He was at Mayo, Dr. Mayo's home. They respected him, and that sort of killed the idea that he, just wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe somewhere else he wouldn't have been, but Mayo Clinic they have no stars. They are teamwork. A
Mhm.
doctor comes in with what his experience is, and they listen to him, and they do a seminar in the morning. The doctors could watch the surgery. They had them on chairs that were on a track above the surgery, and they could move back and forth and look down on the surgery.
Mhm.
It was a sharing thing.
Yeah, just real
And I
collaborative.
experienced this team thing writing.
Yeah,
It was just huge. It was a big team, and sometimes it moved slowly,
yeah.
but they always did the right thing
Hmm.
in the end. It was always well done.
Yeah, that's so nice to just have editors you trust, and even if it's difficult, like the end result is sees the payoff.
That editor, such a kind person and optimistic. The email started with, "Yes, this is great news," and
Oh,
look
that's
at
good.
this. And
Yeah.
they can really be so nice editors. They
Mhm.
pick it apart, and I really liked what he was doing. He was just
Yeah.
using Mayo's input into.
Mhm.
This is their first narrative book. All their books are on like diabetes and heart and like that. This is their first story. So
Yeah, that's exciting.
it was very exciting.
Yeah.
to come and work. And the pandemic came up after we started. It wasn't that
Yeah, I mean that's
all of a sudden we were in the middle of our own pandemic.
Right.
And see, well, everybody didn't want to cooperate with some of the
Mm.
rules. And then we realized what Titonka, but those weren't the same rules that we were trying to use, but